left off, sorry, excuse my voice. Yesterday when we left off, it was getting close to Lily's birthday, which remember is on the 4th of July, so the same day as Independence Day. And Rosalind said that she was going to go into town the next day, and Lily asked if she could go with her. So when she asked Rosalind why she was going to town, she took out her piece of paper and showed her the signature. So again, remember that the news update that they saw from President Johnson on the TV was involving the civil rights movement. So, and we're starting at page 27 in your books. At sunset, he shuffled up, sweaty from work. I met him at the kitchen door, my arms folded across the front of my blouse. I thought I'd walk into town with Rosalind tomorrow. I need to buy some sanitary supplies. He accepted this without comment. T-Ray hated female puberty worse than anything. That night I looked at the jar of bees on my dresser. The poor creatures perched on the bottom, barely moving, obviously pining away for flight. I remembered then the way they'd slipped from the cracks in my walls and flown for the sheer joy of it. I thought about the way my mother had built trails of graham cracker crumbs and marshmallow to lure roaches from the house rather than step on them. I doubted she would have approved of keeping bees in a jar. I unscrewed the lid and set it aside. You can go, I said. But the bees remained there, like planes on a runway, not knowing they'd been cleared for takeoff. They crawled on their stalk legs and around the curved perimeters of the glass, as if the world had shrunk to that jar. I tapped the glass, even laid the jar on its side, but those crazy bees stayed put. So the bees stayed in the jar. The bees were still in there the next morning when Rosalind showed up. She was bearing an angel food cake with 14 candles. Here you go. Happy birthday, she said. We sat down and ate 2 slices each with glasses of milk. The milk left a moon crescent on the darkness of her upper lip, which she didn't bother to wipe away. Later, I would remember that, how she set out a marked woman from the beginning. Sylvan was miles away. We walked along the ledge of the highway, Rosalind moving at the pace of a bank vault door, her spit jug fastened on her finger. Haze hung under the trees, and every inch of air smelled overripe with peaches. You limpin'? Rosalind asked. My knees were aching to the point that I was struggling to keep up with her. A little. Well, why don't we sit down on the side of the road for a while, she said. That's okay, I told her. I'll be fine. A car swept by, slinging scalded air and a layer of dust. Rosalind was slick with heat. She mopped her face and breathed hard. What does it mean if she mopped her face? Can you imagine what that would look like? So it's just like when you mop the floor, it's using that same type of language, right? So she's using a rag to wipe her face. But by using that word mopped, it gives a good image of how wet her face was, how much she was sweating. We were coming to Ebenezer Baptist Church, where T-Ray and I attended. The steeple jutted through a cluster of shade trees. Below, the red bricks looked shadowy and cool. Come on, I said, turning in the drive. Where are you going? We can rest inside the church. The air inside was dim and still, slanted with light from side windows. Not those pretty stained glass windows, but milky panes you can't really see through. I led us down front and sat in the second pew, leaving room for Rosalind. She plucked a paper fan from the hymn book holder and studied the picture on it. A white church with a smiling white lady coming out the door. Rosalind fanned, and I listened to little jets of air come off her hands. She never went to church herself, but on those few times T-Ray had let me walk to her house back in the woods, I'd seen her special shelf with a stub of candle, creek rocks, a reddish feather, and a piece of John the Conqueror root, and right in the center a picture of a woman, propped up without a frame. The first time I saw it, I'd asked Rosalind, "Is that you?" Since I swear the woman looked exactly like her, with woolly braids, blue-black skin, narrow eyes, and most of her concentrated in the lower portion, like an eggplant. "This is my mama," she said. The finish was rubbed off the sides of the picture where her thumbs had held it. Her shelf had to do with a religion she'd made up herself, a mixture of nature and ancestor worship. She'd stopped going to the House of Prayer Full Gospel Holiness Church years ago because it started at 10 in the morning and didn't end until 3 in the afternoon, which is enough religion to kill a full-grown person, she'd said. T-Ray said Rosalind's religion was plain wacko, and for me to stay out of it. But it drew me to her, to think that she loved water rocks and woodpecker feathers, that she had a single picture of her mother, just like I did. One of the church doors opened, and Brother Gerald, our minister, stepped into the sanctuary. "Well, for goodness sake, Lily, what are you doing here?" Then he saw Rosalind and started to rub the bald space on his head with such agitation, I thought he might rub down to the skull bone. Why would he be agitated that Rosalind was in his church? What makes her different? We were walking into town and stopped in to cool off. His mouth formed the word "oh," but he didn't actually say it. He was too busy looking at Rosalind in his church, Rosalind, who chose this moment to spit into her snuff jug. Is that helping things any? It's funny how you forget the rules. She was not supposed to be inside here. Every time a rumor got going about a group of Negroes coming to worship with us on Sunday morning, the deacon stood locked arms across the church steps to turn them away. We love them in the Lord, Brother Gerald said, but they had their own places. So how ironic is that here at a church, so it's supposed to be a place of welcoming, right? Of loving, of welcoming, of kindness, acceptance. And here's a group of men outside locked arms in front of the doors to keep people out. It doesn't quite seem right, does it? "Today's my birthday," I said, hoping to send his thoughts in a new direction. "Is it? Well, happy birthday, Lily. How old are you now?" 14. "Ask him if we can have a couple of these fans for your birthday present," said Rosalind. He made a thin sound, intended for a laugh. Now, if we let everybody borrow a fan that wanted one, the church wouldn't have a fan left. "She was just kidding," I said, and stood up. He smiled, satisfied, and walked beside me all the way to the door, with Rosalind tagging behind. Outside, the sky had whited over with clouds, and shine spilled across the surfaces, sending motes before my eyes. When we'd cut through the parsonage yard and we were back on the highway, Rosalind produced 2 church fans from the bosom of her dress, and, doing an impersonation of me, gazed up, sweet-faced, she said, "Oh, Brother Gerald, she was just kidding." So what did Rosalind do? She took the fans anyways, right? We came into Sylvan on the worst side of town. Old houses set up on cinder blocks, fans wedged in the windows, dirt yards, women in pink curlers, collarless dogs. After a few blocks, we approached the ESO station on the corner of West Market and Park Street, generally recognized as a catch-all place for men with too much time on their hands. I noticed that not a single car was getting gas. 3 men sat in dinette chairs beside the garage with a piece of plywood balanced on their knees. They were playing cards. "Hit me," one of them said to the dealer, who wore a seed and feed cap, slapped a card down in front of him. He looked up and saw us, Rosalind fanning and shuffling, swaying side to side. "Well, look what we got coming here," he called out. "Where are you going?" Firecrackers made a spattering sound in the distance. "Keep walking," I whispered. "Don't pay any attention." But Rosalind, who had less sense than I'd dreamed, said in this tone like she was explaining something real hard to a kindergarten student, "I'm going to register my name so I can vote. That's what." "We should hurry on," I said, but she kept walking at her own slow pace. The man next to the dealer, with hair combed straight back, put down his cards and said, "Did you hear that? We got ourselves a model citizen." I heard a slow song of wind drift ever so slightly in the street behind us and move along the gutter. We walked, and the men pushed back their makeshift table and came right down to the curb to wait for us, like they were spectators at a parade and we were the prize float. "Did you ever see one that black?" said the dealer. And the man with his combed back hair said, "No, and I ain't seen one that big either." Naturally, the third man felt obliged to say something, so he looked at Rosalind, sashaying along unperturbed, holding her white lady fan, and said, Where'd you get that fan? Stole it from a church, she said. Just like that. I had gone once in a raft down the Chattahooga River with my church group, and the same feeling came to me now of being lifted by currents, by a swirl of events I couldn't reverse. Coming alongside the men, Rosalind lifted her snuff jug, which was filled with black spit, and calmly poured it across the tops of the men's shoes, moving her hand in little loops like she was writing her name, Rosalind Days, just the way she'd practiced. For a second, they stared down at the juice, dribbled like car oil across their shoes. They blinked, trying to make it register. When they looked up, I watched their faces go from surprise to anger, then outright fury. They lunged at her, and everything started to spin. There was Rosalind, grabbed and thrashing side to side, swinging the men like pocketbooks on her arms, and the men yelling for her to apologize and clean their shoes. Clean it off! That's all I could hear over and over, and then the cry of birds overhead, sharp as needles, sweeping from low bow trees, stirring up the scent of pine, and even then I knew I would recoil all my life from the smell of it. Call the police, yelled the dealer to the man inside. By then, Rosalind lay sprawled on the ground, pinned, twisting her fingers around clumps of grass. Blood ran from a cut beneath her eye. It curved under her chin the way tears do. When the policeman got there, he said we had to get in the back of his car. You're under arrest, he told Rosalind. Assault, theft, and disturbing the peace. Then he said to me, when we get down to the station, I'll call your daddy and let him deal with you. Rosalind climbed in, sliding over on the seat. I moved after her, sliding as she slid, sitting as she sat. The door closed. So quiet it amounted to nothing but a snap of air, and that was the strangeness of it. How a small sound like that could fall across the whole world.